Someone You Should Know, a program about people you know and even more that you don't. Hosted by Stuart Sax, veteran, husband, father, and grandfather. Now, here's your host, Stuart Sax.
Well, welcome to another edition of Someone You Should Know. I'm very, very glad to have you with us today. We're going to be having a great conversation with a really, really nice young lady. We are brought to you today by our good friend Irving Chung, who is a franchise specialist. And if you have ever given any thought about franchising, getting involved with other people maybe, and getting into a franchise, a large one, a small one, a full-time, part-time, you need to talk to somebody that knows what they're talking about and knows everything there is to know about franchising. And and Irving Chung is the guy. Get in touch with him. He'll give you a free consultation. You can ask questions, and if it's right for you, fine. And if not, you'll just have a great time talking to Irving. So reach out if you want to know more about franchising. There's some fascinating stuff out there. Well, I have a young lady with me today who is an author. She is the author of 4 books. I believe that the fourth one is just getting ready to hit the market and all, but she's got a couple of good backstories. So from Boston, Massachusetts, by way of Westerville, Ohio, I welcome Beth Castrodale.
Hi, Stuart. It's great to be here.
I had to throw in the Westerville thing because we'll talk a little bit more about that later too.
I look forward to that.
Well, you are an author, and I guess probably the first question that raises in my mind is, how does it feel to call yourself a published author?
It's funny. I was unpublished for so long that I just sort of, I appreciate that I'm published, but I've sort of just have always thought of myself as a writer, plain and simple. And the publishing part was a nice surprise for sure.
Well, I mean, you have been in journalism um, pretty much what, your whole career.
Yeah, well, I started, it's
Did
funny. My
did you
my
study journalism in
I did. Yeah, I was a journalism major at Ohio State. And the big part of that, was working for the student newspaper, and then then I worked in I after graduation I was in worked as a journalist for a couple of years, but I had sort of a one of these realizations that first of all, I'm a super hardcore introvert, and it really isn't a good match with journalism. And also, I thought like I wanted a career where I maybe have more time for writing, and just being a reporter is like it could be like a 18-hour a day job, and I ended up getting into book publishing from there. So um, yeah, so
what what was it like to transition from being a reporter and gathering the information and all to now organizing it to publish?
It's funny. It was a big shift in a lot of ways. I wasn't so much, gathering the information and, writing and reporting. It was more of helping other writers kind of get their work into a publishable form. So it was definitely more of kind of the back of the house kind of stuff, maybe that, you're kind of you're not on the stage, but you're back there trying to help the presentation be as good as possible. So um, which was very rewarding in its own way, for sure.
So when you got into publishing, then working into publishing, was that about the same time that you decided to put together your first novel?
Yeah, I was working. I'm trying to think. Like my memory, like going back is a little bit flawed, but as I recall it, I was working. I worked on was working on a novel when I was still a journalist, and that one never took off. I think I'd never tried to even get it published. And as I transitioned into publishing, that's when I started really working more, spending more time on my fiction and, working on short stories and novels. So it did start, when I was working as a journalist, but it definitely spent more time on my fiction writing once I was in publishing, which is really great. So I had more time and more
So I
mental
need
bandwidth.
So, as a little point of a reference here, what year are we talking about that you're going into publishing and doing this?
I'm trying to think. I started out as an intern, and I think it was 1989, 1990, something like that. Um, so yeah, so then then I was in book publishing for many years, and then I went on to other forms of editing beyond, the book industry. So, but that's when I kind of made the break from journalism.
And your first novel was Mary Hadley, Marion Hadley, and that was released in what year?
That was 2017.
Okay.
So,
All right, and folks, there's a reason why I'm asking for some of these dates because there's another side to Beth Castrodale that is I think fascinating, interesting, and also maybe a little scary. And that was that in was it 2009? You suffered a traumatic brain injury. And you wanna share with us a little bit about the circumstances for that and how that affected you both emotionally, mentally, physically, and all.
yeah, I mean, it was a completely unexpected thing. I mean, often you hear of traumatic brain injuries happening in, car accidents or, someone's at a construction site or whatever. Mine was, total. I've never fainted in my life, and I went into a supermarket to get some chrysanthemums for a friend's mother's grave, if you could believe it. And the last I remember reaching for the chrysanthemums, and that's the last memory I have. Apparently, I fell back on cracked my skull open on the supermarket floor, and, yeah, it was just I have no, yeah. So it was just, and then from there, I don't have no memory of, like, at least the first few days, and I had a kind of a long rehabilitation from there, and but was very fortunate to get through it, and, I didn't think I'd ever be writing again. I had trouble reading, and it's kind of a, long story, but, yeah, it was a long road.
Well, even though it's a long story, Beth, I think it's an important story to try and share with our listeners because uh, people that suffer strokes or traumatic brain injuries and things like that, very often the road to recovery is not only long, but it's not always 100%. You have to work very hard at trying to regain those faculties. And what was that process like for you, and what was that rehabilitative process like? What did you go through?
Yeah, well, first of it was, like, inpatient, at a rehabilitation facility, and a lot of it, early on was kind of just assessing my cognitive abilities and trying to figure out what I needed from there, and then it was physical therapy, and the good thing, I mean, I have to say, like, I'm a runner, and I think that really helped me so much because, I pretty much I got into physical therapy, they had me on the treadmill, and they're like, you're fine that way," and I think, I think that it helped that the level of my physical activity really helped me recover, not just physically, but mentally. I mean, I, one of the big important parts of my recovery was this, strange as it may sound, was sleeping a ton. I mean, I slept most of every day, and then I had some, outpatient rehab where I had to they basically had me make sure that I could do the activities of daily living. Like, for instance, they might have me, "Here's a kitchen, here's a box of muffin mix. We want you to make these muffins and follow the directions." And, they take me to a train station and they'd give me like, "We want you to find your way to buy this thing here, get a ticket." They were just making sure that I could do those things. And I did, but from the writing standpoint, I mean, I just didn't have it in me I was like, I don't know if I can, think straight to write, and so it took me a while, and I can't even tell you, Stuart, what made that possible. I mean, I think just the healing of my body and my brain, eventually made it so I could sit down in front of the computer and try to get back into my writing. So, um,
Well, certainly an optimistic outlook and perseverance has a lot to do with it. As you said, the fact that you were physically fit probably helped you with your mental recovery also.
no doubt, yeah, I'm convinced of it, and I've actually read some research in the field, and, it seems like there's been I think I wish I had the study to cite here, but, a 2022 study that was released was talking about with traumatic brain injury, that physical activity. I mean, there's a lot going against you in terms of recovery, and then your future risk for something like dementia and cognitive decline. But if you have physical activity in there, it does help you a little, kind of hedge that a little bit. So yeah, definitely.
Are there any residual effects that you feel today, for instance, with your short or long-term memory?
I've not to my, it's easy to not to my knowledge, which even saying that sounds, uncertain because maybe there are things I'm not picking up on that other people notice. But my husband's very honest with me. He says like he doesn't see anything on that front, but the one trailing thing that I'm aware of is my sense of smell is never fully recovered. And that sometimes with TBI, that could be one of the things that happens. But I'm really fortunate that for me, it could have been so much worse long term. I mean, I could have just, your personality, your cognitive abilities. I mean, I really, I mean, as these things go, I think I was very, very fortunate that it wasn't a whole lot worse than it was. So definitely.
Well, and also to your credit, to go from a traumatic brain injury situation like this back in 2009 to now being a published author, with her first book out, less than 10 years later, and all, again, it's a testament to your ability to overcome any of these challenges to say, I am a publisher, I am a writer, I want to create, I wanna do this, and to be able to do it, and now you got, what, 3 books published and the 4th one getting ready to come out?
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that, and I feel like there's so many people that help supported me along the way to make that possible. So I'm very grateful for sure.
So the website is very easy, folks. It's bethsname.com, bethcastrodale.com, and, there's a wealth of information there. It'll also have information about, her books. The one right there, The Inhabitants is the one that's coming out, next, and, I'm gonna get it. I already have started one of Beth's books, uh, In This Ground, it's called. Uh, it's a fascinating book, and we're gonna talk about it in just a minute because I have no idea how you put together the characters and the scenario for this book. I mean, having don't not having a background in the field that you're talking about. But the first book, was Marian Hatley, and I want you to share with the audience a little bit about where the thought came for Marian Hatley, and then go through this process a little bit about how you develop the character and the storyline.
Yeah, well, just to give the audience a little background on Marion Hatley, it's set during the Depression, and the main character is a corset maker who was, kind of serving the ladies of Pittsburgh, and she kind of gets involved in a scandal, and she has to flee town, and she ends up fleeing town to take care of an elderly relative of hers, and this throughout the story, Marion ends up discovering some facts about her past that she didn't know about, and she's also developed this kind of an element of science fiction in the book is that, she creates this incredible corset that's comfortable and is actually, improves women's lives, which is, complete science fiction really. But I that story actually it was inspired by my maternal grandmother, Cleo. And I remember my mother saying that, my grandmother helped to run a farm, and, you can imagine doing all the work of on a farm and wearing a corset, which my grandmother did. And I thought, God almighty, what if, someone could come to the rescue of women like my grandma at that time? And, so that kind of, was that's sort of how I got started on that story in a way. So, um, yeah, it was a lot of fun to write that one.
So Marion Hatley is not a real person. It's a fictitious person, but was based on a little bit of research that you did, from that time period.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, exactly.
So, not being a writer, I'm an aspiring writer. I would love to write. Everybody says to me, "You should write a book." In fact, probably the majority of the population says, "Someday I'm gonna write a book," but they don't take the time to do it. What I wanna know is tell us a little bit about your thought process. Did you come up with, Marion Hatley, the corset maker, as the key first, or did you come up with the story and then place Marion Hatley into the story? How do you determine where the storyline is going to go?
Yeah, that one definitely started with her, and then it started from there. There's very very much a sense of place. So the story in my mind was set on a farm in Western Pennsylvania that's still actually in my family, and so I was kind of thinking about all of the connections to the setting, and um, so that kind of you know brought in a lot of different elements. There's I the time and the place, and also some of the local characters who were on the scene. One of the other major characters is a veteran of World War I who I envisioned living in a house that wasn't far from my family's farmhouse, and I kind of integrated him into the story and, brought in, some elements that were of that time, but in connected to place as well. So there was a veteran of World War I who factors into the story very heavily, and I did a lot of research into the war journals that were kept by veterans of World War I, and that really helped that angle of the story. So
So, and so when you start to develop the story, do you find that once you get going, it just flows, or do you sometimes have what they call writer's block? You get so far, and then all of a sudden, I gotta stop and put it on hold for a bit.
yeah, those moments of flow are fleeting, and they're there. They're the best part, or one of the best parts for me of writing. But between those moments of flow comes a lot of like doubt and rethinking, and I think with when it comes to a novel, you might have heard there's people that are called plotters versus pantsers, and the plotters want everything kinda or a lot of things plotted out, and then pantsers are like, "Just see to my pants." I'm kind of in the middle, like, I definitely have moments where, I need to have sort of an overarching, idea of the novel or I can't move forward, but even having that, you definitely have moments of doubt, and you have to kind of rethink things, and, I don't wanna complain about those moments at all, because I think there are definitely times where you just pause and rethink angles of a story or characters or how you're moving the plot forward. Definitely you have those moments, and they're not all bad. Sometimes they're necessary, I think. So
We also have a tendency to follow certain writers and all that, that will have a character, and then book 2 brings that character into a new scenario. Then book 3 is the same character in another setting. You didn't do that. Each one of your books is completely unrelated to each other. How easy or difficult is that for you to transition from one scenario to another?
it's really funny. It's challenging, but on the other hand, it's so fun to go into fresh territory. I mean, I think one of the kind of the selfish reasons I do that is like I want to keep myself interested and entertained. And so one of the joys of fiction writing, I think, is going into another world and another set of characters. And so it's just fun. I think I mean I admire people. It's a real talent to take a character across, have a series, where take people on a long journey. I think that's great, and I don't wanna just count that, but for me personally, I just feel like I find it more of an adventure to immerse myself in new worlds and characters, so, um
Well, I think that also gives your readers a fresh aspect, into the stories that you tell, so they will now kind of follow your writing style rather than following the same characters, part 2, part 3, part 4.
Yeah, I hope so, but I think from a marketing and sales point of view, like, a lot of times you hear, like, "Gosh, you wanna have a series because you get people hooked and then they'll keep buying your books," and I totally think, like, I feel like maybe from a marketing standpoint, it's harder, but I feel like I hope you're right. I mean, I hope people who will, read one of my books and enjoy it, will be interested in following and, seeing what the other books are like, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Sometimes in children's books, you'll have a series of children's stories. I mean, I think back to when I was growing up, there were the Hardy Boys mysteries, and the Hardy Boys
Mhm.
were always, at the center of attention, but the setting was just it was a new mystery. So you could get their
Right.
13th book was very similar to the first or second book. Uh, but and the reason that I bring this up is because we talked a little about Marion Hatley, uh, which was about a corset maker back in the 30s and all. Your second book, In This Ground, uh, boy, what a 180 turn there was in that, because now the setting is in a cemetery. It has to do with rock and roll music, and all. And you had never worked in a cemetery or had a family, members that were involved in this. Where did you come up with the concept of the rock and rollers and the cemetery?
If the kind of the kickoff of that book is I've always loved cemeteries, and when I was a little girl living outside of Pittsburgh, a dear friend of mine and I, there was a cemetery near our house, and we used to walk around it a lot and like just walk around and like look at the names on the gravestones and just wonder who are these people, and we used to like kind of make up stories now and then about them. So I've always loved cemeteries, and actually near my home in Boston is what they call a garden cemetery. It's Forest Hills, and it's one of these wonderful kind of, 19th century on cemeteries that has it's all kind of sculptural and, it has, like, wooded and a lot of twists and turns. It's almost like you wanna get lost in it. It's like a park. And so I thought, what would it be like to have a novel that takes place almost entirely in a cemetery like that? And, who better to kinda connect the worlds of the living and the dead than a gravedigger? So I got the idea for Ben, the main character in the novel, and I also thought, but Ben's gotta have a backstory, and I thought, what would it be like for Ben to have a friend who's buried underneath his feet, and what was their relationship like, and how does Ben feel about this? So anyhow, trying to make a long story short, I just had this idea of connecting this living person who kind of connects the worlds of the living and the dead, but he's also dealing with his own issues, and he's also trying to be protect the cemetery and defend the cemetery from some things that are going on. And so anyhow, and the rock and roll angle in that, I just thought about I think about music is so connected to life, and that it's one of those things I think that sustains us at, times of death and grief, and, it's just difficult times in life. So I thought, why not have Ben be a former musician who wants to reconnect with his music, and by the way, the guy who's buried under his feet, his friend used to be in a rock band with him. So Ben is kind of reckoning with that. So anyhow, long answer to a good question.
No, no, it's a valid question and a very, very good answer, because the fact that you have some knowledge and experience and fascination with cemeteries, that's obviously a great foundation for saying, "I'd like to write a story," and that's gonna be at least one element. The fact that you then turn around and say, "Well, I also like rock and roll music, so I'm gonna put the rock and roll music and the cemetery together." I mean, that to me is kind of, that magic moment where you say, "Ah, have I got an idea?" Um, and I told you before we started the show, that I'm reading, In This Ground right now. I'm about halfway through the book. It's really fascinating. Uh, Number 1, I am not a real fan of cemeteries, but I used to be an old rock and roller too. So I'm looking at it from a few different angles. But for somebody who, let's remember, folks, this is a young lady who has suffered a traumatic brain injury. She is pushing her limits too, to develop these characters, develop the scenarios, and you obviously are seeing things through different eyes than other writers or readers would see.
Yeah, I hope so. I think every writer brings their, another writer given this topic would write a totally different novel and have a totally different take. But I hope that I brought something unique to it, and I have to just as I hope that, somewhat related point. I think one thing that helped me with that was just I spent some time hanging out with an actual gravedigger, so that helped me.
Yeah.
That helped me a lot.
Yeah, I
Envisioning
mean, you
the
decide,
character.
okay, if I'm gonna write a story about this, maybe I need to learn a little bit more. So, hey, I'll just go hang out with a gravedigger to find out a little more about it.
That was
I mean,
great.
it couldn't have been like a baker, or or something like, oh, a gravedigger. Well, I mean, what's interesting is that this show is going to be seen about a week before Halloween, and also does that holiday have any kind of a special meaning for you?
Oh, I love Halloween. I've always loved it, and, yeah, I mean, I think about, I loved it since I was a kid, but I always loved that there's, like, also connection to Dia de los Muertos, where there's the connection of the idea of that, Day of the Dead, where you have a thinner veil between the dead and the living, and I think of that as, it's just kind of, as I get older, I see the season as and I've lost more people, I see it as not just, spooky stories and trick or treat and that kind of thing, but also we think about the people that we've lost, and it's I think maybe even more than I don't know, it's a time of year when more especially as I get older, I think about you know, remembering people that I've loved and have lost around this time of year.
Well, there is a little bit of a thread that deals with grief in your novels too, and you have dealt with it. And so, do you find that your own personal situations also give you a little bit of that adrenaline to overcome it in your novels?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. I think that it's sort of I think that on when you enter a fictional world, you kind of are able to explore different angles through another character's world or vision about how they deal with loss, and it kind of opens up different ways of thinking about loss in your life. And I don't know, I hope that with readers that I'm sad to say I think most of us can identify with this kind of grief and sadness, and I hope that in some way that the readers can kind of maybe it prompts reflection for them, and maybe seeing how it's something universal that we all have to grapple with at some point.
And and how does that attacking the subject of grief and bringing that kind of into your novels and all, how does that help Beth Castrodale personally by putting those words down on paper?
Yeah, it's funny. Let me think about that a little bit. Like it's funny when I'm really in a writing and in a character's world, I kind of don't think of myself that much at all because I mean, I feel like at the best moments, I'm in another world and I don't think of myself in a way. But then I think when I'm not writing and I step away from it, I do think that you know, subconsciously, I've never thought about this outwardly, but I think subconsciously that fact of having had a character explore grief or go through it has helped me come to a peace more, maybe if that's a way of saying it. Even though when I'm actively writing, that's not happening, I think retrospectively or subconsciously that's happening.
And I mean, is it fair to say that other writers like yourself, very often you take real life experiences and you just kind of rewrite those into your novels, but there is some of those elements of what you have gone through in your life that kind of bleed into the manuscript?
Yeah. I think it's funny with my, I think there's very few things that are directly, storylines that are directly taken from my life. But that being said, there's no way I could construct a fictional world without drawing on my own experiences. So I think that definitely, I'm just trying to think from a current novel that I'm working on, which again connects to the family farm in Pennsylvania. I think like the scene that's happening on the farm in my novel isn't anything like I've experienced, but I definitely feel myself drawing on memories and situations of the place to create that world, even if it doesn't recreate it directly, if that makes sense.
Well, and would you also say that it is more difficult to fictionalize a storyline, rather than writing, something that's more factual based on historical events, organizing thoughts that way? Because facts are facts, but you're creating something that might have a few factual references, but it is all a brand new story.
Yeah, it's definitely it's challenging. I mean, I found that like I want to try to be responsible about when I write about anything that has historical elements, like the Marion Hadley had the First World War, so I mean I had a veteran of of that war, an American veteran, coming into the war a little bit later, and having things that were I didn't wanna disrespect history, so I really tried to, when I was using those journals of the veterans and researching things, I was like, "God, just be really careful." I mean, I chances are, 9 out of 10 people, if I made a mistake, they might not have noticed, but I just feel like, whenever I draw in historical elements, I try to do the due diligence and then with the gravedigger, I just thought like, I wanted to really try to make sure I had my facts straight about the actual logistics of running a cemetery and digging graves and that sort of thing. Just kind of getting the facts right to the extent I could. So um,
So
definitely.
so
So there's a challenge there.
Yeah. So now share with those that are watching and listening a little bit about the thought process that went into your third novel, I Mean You No Harm. How did that one transpire?
Yeah, so that one is actually, I mean, it's a thriller. So I'd never written in that genre before. So part of it was I wanted to try my hand at that. And but I also um I guess you describe me generally as, that if you had to say what genre of writing are you do you what's your overall genre? It's literary fiction is the best description probably. So it was kind of like, for lack of a better word, it was what you might call literary thriller. So I was trying to think about how could I create a story that has the elements of a thriller and kind of you know a plot that moves fairly quickly, but also not stint on character development and having, uh, what I hope characters that the readers could really care about and get a sense of what's driving them and what their personal histories are. So, and that, yeah. So I had the idea of two. I mean, the kind of the central idea was, two half sisters who share a career criminal father who dies, and the sisters don't really know each other well, and they kind of reconnect at his funeral, and they realize that he has some unfinished business that they end up getting tangled up in to their peril. So so I had the idea that the core thing there was the family, and the story is told from the point of view from kind of the good girl sister who really didn't grow up with her father, and you know was kind of a straight player, but I'm like, what is it like to have someone who is kind of the good girl get thrown in with this kind of dark stuff, and how does she deal with it? So, I was really interested in kind of having her journey be kind of the central one. So, um, it was fun. It was interesting,
Again, a fascinating story, and just totally unrelated to novel one and novel two. And So those 3 are on the shelf, folks. Check out the website. If you're so inclined, get a hold of Beth Castrodale's books because they're fascinating and like we've said, it's not a continuation of one book to another. They're 3 completely different stories, and so now that leads us to what can people look forward to in your 4th novel, which is titled The Inhabitants. What was the thought process? Where did this one come about?
Yeah, so this one, I have always been a fan of ghost stories, and I've always, when I was a little girl, I used to write them, and as an adult, I thought, when it, I just had the idea of writing a novel that would feature um, ghosts in some way. So finally, I got around to putting one together, and this one won't be out until fall of 2024. It'll be coming out from Regal House, so it's not available yet. But the idea for it, is I got the sense of what would it be like to have kind of another kind of fish out of sea story in a way that the central character, she just happens to inherit this house that she doesn't really know anything about, and it turns out that it was built by an architect, a 19th century architect who uh, tried to introduce architectural features into homes and institutions that would influence the mind, and hopefully in beneficial ways. But the main character starts to have experiences in this house and also beyond it that kind of get her questioning. Is it the house? Is it me? And then meanwhile, there's a she also inherits a housekeeper who um, seems to, is helping the main character, but she also has seemed to have maybe an agenda of her own, and she also might not necessarily be of this world. So it's a little bit gothic, is how I would describe it, and but anyhow, it's a little bit of a ghost story and novel,
Is
psychological
there
ghost story.
is there a physical property that you visited or saw or researched or whatever that became the house in your novel?
It's funny, I imagine the house is having Victorian elements, and, I actually live in a Victorian house, so I've always loved that style, but,
Okay.
I would yeah, so it's one of my favorites, but, in terms of a direct inspiration for this novel, it's funny, I kinda made up a lot of the weird aspects, although there's some kinda surreal stuff, like, I'm thinking of, like, it's not as extreme as, like, Gaudi, his architecture, but some stuff that's a little bit surreal and kind of mind-bending, so I thought, "How could I bring those elements into a Victorian?" So I had to kinda make some of that stuff up, but
Well, I had said earlier in our discussion that, sometimes people say you should write a book, or some people say, I would like to write a book. What advice would you give to people who say, I would like to write a book, but I don't really know what to write about or where to begin or what to do. If you've got that urge, you've got that little fire, what does Beth Castrodale tell people to move it to the next level?
yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, I think, it helps to, like, really having some building some kind of writing community is so important, I think, like, if you can have people who are there, like sometimes it's just a matter of moral support where you have writers that you check in with each other and you say, "How are you doing? How are you coming? Did you write anything this week? What did you do?" Just checking in, or having maybe goalposts that you talk to your writer friends about, and then later when you actually have pages, people whose opinions who, you think that they have could give you constructive and helpful criticism if you can exchange pages and get commentary, but and also just moral support, I think. But that is so important, I think, is to have a community. And I know, like, I was fortunate in Boston. There's a lot of I just happen, different fiction writing workshops. I kind of, build a community that way. But I think now online, many years later online, there's actually, you can find other people that want to exchange drafts or, kind of offer feedback and support. But I would highly recommend that for sure.
That's great advice. It's great advice. And again, this can be if you want to be a writer of short stories or articles, it doesn't necessarily have to be a autobiography or a novel. Uh, there are so many avenues for writing, and it's a matter of just getting the juices, down on paper. I mean, I think it's fascinating, and again, I think it's so fascinating from the standpoint that you went through a very traumatic period in your life and was able to really turn that instance into something that is just launched a beautiful, beautiful career for you now.
Oh, well, thank you, Stuart. I appreciate that. I feel very lucky. I mean, as I might have mentioned before, I wouldn't have done it without a huge, supportive friends and family members, and I'm grateful to people like you who are, reaching out and, are sharing, allowing me to share a little bit more about my books and everything. So I really appreciate that.
Do you have a little notebook where you've got just sketched in a couple of ideas for, book number 5, 6, 7, 8, and beyond?
I don't. I mean, I know I have so many writer friends who keep journals and books and notes, and the only thing I do is like, speaking of running, I'm out running. I'm not in front of my computer, and something will come into my head, and so I just try to, when I get back, on my computer, just write it down, or if I'm actually working, like the novel I'm working on now, a lot of times ideas will come into my head when I'm not in front of the computer, so I just try to get back and jot them down as quickly as I can.
Listen,
So
I know what you're talking about because very often when I'm out walking or even in the middle of the night, you get up and you got this idea for a show or something. The hard thing is when you wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, what was I thinking? What was that idea?"
it's true. Yeah, I've had that feeling. I don't know if you've had this too, though. There's sometimes a nighttime thought, you're like, "Oh, this is such a great idea." And then in the morning, you're like, "Oh, that wasn't such," but you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Sometimes, I don't know, it's like nighttime, at least for me, sometimes the thoughts that I have at the late night, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good, but depends.
Well,
So
Beth, it's been absolutely a pleasure talking with you. I thank you very, very much for taking the time to be with us. Uh, I like to quote Oscar Wilde at the end of my show, and I use his quote, "Be yourself because everyone else is already taken." And you, as a novelist, probably understand that phrase very, very much so. So thank you very much. That'll do it for another edition of Someone You Should Know and our very, very special guest, Beth Castrodale. Thank you again, Beth.
thank you. Thank you, Stuart. It's been such a pleasure. I appreciate it.